The sun had barely risen over the Pacific coastline, yet the Naval Special Warfare Training Center at Coronado was already alive with movement. Recruits in standard-issue navy blue sweats jogged across the tarmac, their breaths puffing in the cool morning air. The rhythmic thud of sneakers against concrete and the occasional bark of an instructor's whistle filled the compound. Among them, a small, unassuming figure walked with a purposeful stride, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes. To anyone else, she looked like any other trainee, quiet, disciplined, and keeping to herself. But behind those calm eyes, there was a history most could never imagine. Sarah had served in some of the most dangerous combat zones in the world. She had endured missions that would have broken the average soldier, survived ambushes, navigated hostile territories, and faced life-or-death decisions with calm precision. Yet here, in this sprawling training compound, she was just another new recruit, or so the others thought. Her assignment was unique, undercover, observing her peers' behavior, evaluating their teamwork, and testing the leadership skills of men who thought themselves unshakable. The barracks were buzzing with energy as she stepped inside, her boots scuffing lightly on the polished linoleum floor. A group of young men lounged near the entrance, tossing footballs and joking loudly. When Sarah walked past, their conversation fell into an awkward silence. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with an arrogant grin, whispered, "Hey, check her out. Wonder if she even knows how to tie her boots." Laughter followed, low and mocking. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her presence alone commanded attention. As she reached her assigned bunk, she placed her duffel bag down and carefully organized her gear. Each item, boots, uniform, weapons training manuals, had its place. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, almost ceremonial. She glanced at her reflection in the small mirror above the locker. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable, but her eyes burned with a quiet intensity. She didn't come here to impress anyone. She came to observe, to teach, and if necessary, to correct. Across the room, the other recruits continued to chatter. They sized her up the way soldiers do when encountering someone unfamiliar, quietly assessing strength, looking for weaknesses, subtle cues of fear or hesitation. Most of them didn't notice what Sarah had learned to hide, the subtle shifts in posture, the way she scanned the room, the micro-adjustments in her breathing that kept her ready for any sudden movement. In combat, these were second nature. Here, they were invisible to untrained eyes. By the afternoon, Sarah joined the others for basic drills. She lined up with them, her frame smaller than most of the men, but her movements sharp and confident. When the whistle blew, signaling the start of a timed obstacle course, she ran with controlled energy. She vaulted over walls, crawled through mud, and scaled ropes with fluid precision. Her hands gripped the bars as if they were extensions of her own body, her feet landing lightly but firmly. The other recruits struggled, some grunting, some slipping, some barely making the required time. Yet Sarah moved forward steadily, her face calm, focused, untouched by fatigue. After the course, a few recruits tried to start conversations with her. "Hey, you new here?" one asked, his voice tinged with sarcasm. Sarah nodded politely. "Yes, reporting for training." She offered nothing more, no hints about her past, no attempt to brag or explain herself. The silence frustrated them. Some started to whisper behind her back. Why is she so quiet? Does she even belong here? Sarah didn't react. She had learned early in her career that silence could be a weapon. In combat, those who spoke too much often gave away their position or their intentions. Here, she was testing the same principle, observing how ego and arrogance influence behavior under stress. She watched the recruits closely, noting small tells, the way they looked at each other for approval, the subtle signs of competitiveness, the tiny cracks in confidence that revealed who truly had potential. The day ended with basic classroom instruction on tactics and team strategy. Sarah sat near the back, her posture straight, taking meticulous notes. Around her, male recruits whispered and jostled, trying to impress instructors or each other. One of the instructors glanced her way, noting her calm presence. Without drawing attention, Sarah absorbed every word, every gesture, every nuance. She understood that in these early days, perception was everything. If the men underestimated her, it would serve as a powerful lesson later. Evening fell, and the recruits returned to the barracks. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the campus. Some of the men lingered in the common area, joking loudly about who had performed worst during the drills. Sarah entered quietly, carrying only her essentials. She didn't mingle, didn't comment, didn't smile or react. Instead, she chose a spot near the back, unpacked methodically, and prepared for the next day's exercises. Her quiet discipline contrasted sharply with the noisy arrogance surrounding her. By the time the lights were dimmed for lights out, a quiet tension had settled over the barracks. Some recruits still whispered about her, some still doubted her abilities, but a few had begun to notice something different. There was a calm, unshakable presence about her that seemed to radiate quietly yet powerfully. She wasn't seeking attention, but her confidence made her impossible to ignore. As the last echoes of laughter faded, Sarah lay on her bunk, eyes open, reflecting. She thought about the mission ahead, observing, evaluating, teaching lessons that would resonate long after her assignment ended. She had faced life-and-death situations in deserts and mountains far from home, yet she understood that this environment, too, demanded vigilance. Underestimation was a dangerous game, and these recruits were already beginning to play it. She closed her eyes finally, letting the exhaustion seep in. Tomorrow, the training would intensify. Obstacles would become more grueling, drills more complex, and the young men more impatient. But Sarah was ready. She had always been ready. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the events unfolding in the barracks would soon reach a tipping point, a moment when arrogance would collide with skill, and the quiet arrival of one Navy SEAL would be impossible to ignore. For now, though, she rested, calm, collected, and entirely aware that her presence alone was already teaching the first, most crucial lesson of all. Never underestimate someone who seems quiet, because that person is often the one you should fear most. The sun rose again over the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, painting the barracks and training fields in gold. Sarah Hayes was already awake, moving with deliberate calm. The early hours were her time, the quiet before the storm of drills, running, and obstacle courses. She quietly folded her uniform, checked her gear, and performed a short warm-up. To an observer, it seemed like routine discipline. But Sarah's mind was alert, calculating, observing the group of recruits that would soon converge for morning exercises. From the corner of the barracks, she could feel them. Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Cavanaugh. 5 young men, full of bravado and arrogance, who had decided that Sarah's quiet demeanor was an invitation for mockery. They weren't wrong about her calm nature, but they were dangerously wrong about her weakness. Sarah knew it. She had learned early in her SEAL career that those who underestimate a person are often the first to regret it. During breakfast, the 5 men surrounded her. Mason leaned over the table with a smirk. "Hey, did you even get any sleep last night? Or were you just meditating, trying to summon courage?" Torres snorted behind him, trying to hide a laugh. Green added, "We'll see how you do in drills today. Maybe you'll fall flat on your face like everyone else." Holt and Cavanaugh exchanged glances, eager to see her embarrassed. The tone was light but cutting. They thought they were teasing harmlessly. Sarah didn't flinch. She kept her gaze forward, calm and unbroken, chewing her toast slowly. Her silence unnerved them. After breakfast, the group moved to the obstacle course. The recruits had begun to notice her speed and precision, but instead of respect, it fueled their resentment. They whispered among themselves, forming small cliques to undermine her. "She's probably all talk," Mason muttered. "Bet she trips over that rope," Torres said, pointing at the climbing wall. Green laughed. "Yeah, let's see her try to keep up." Holt and Kavanaugh snickered in agreement. They didn't yet realize that Sarah had spent years climbing cliffs, scaling buildings, and performing operations under fire. The training here was almost too basic for her. The whistle blew, and the recruits began the timed obstacle run. Sarah ran beside them, keeping a measured pace, her movements flawless. She vaulted over walls, swung across bars, and crawled through mud with controlled grace. Every step, every grip, every jump was calculated. The men tried to match her speed, but faltered repeatedly. Mason slipped over a bar. Torres stumbled through mud. Green grunted as he strained to pull himself up a rope. Holt and Kavanaugh lagged behind, struggling to maintain coordination. Sarah completed the course without a single misstep, landing lightly on the ground, calm, composed, as though she had barely exerted herself. The 5 men's frustration boiled over. "This isn't fair," Mason growled, red-faced and angry. Torres muttered, "It's like she's cheating or something." Green snapped, "Nobody runs like that. Not even instructors." Holt and Kavanaugh exchanged annoyed glances, realizing that their ridicule from breakfast was backfiring. The entire group had watched her finish effortlessly, and the whispers began to shift from mockery to disbelief. Sarah glanced at them briefly, her eyes calm but piercing. She didn't need to say a word. Her performance had spoken volumes. Later, during firearms training, the tension only grew. Sarah handled the M4 with surgical precision, her shots consistently hitting the bullseye, while the 5 men struggled to maintain accuracy. Mason's first magazine scattered shots across the target, missing by inches. Torres' shots landed unevenly. Green's hand shook. Holt cursed under his breath, and Kavanaugh grew increasingly flustered. Sarah's steady hands, calm breathing, and sharp eye control made their mistakes look even more glaring. Once again, she didn't gloat. She didn't even react. She only moved with quiet efficiency, a silent reminder of her skill. The men began to hatch a plan. They whispered during breaks, plotting to embarrass her publicly. "Tonight, after lights out," Mason suggested, "we'll trap her in the mess hall. She be alone. We'll show her she doesn't belong." The others nodded eagerly, thinking they were clever, unaware that they were stepping into dangerous territory. Sarah, meanwhile, was already aware of their intentions. She didn't need to react yet. Patience and observation were part of the lesson she was about to teach. That afternoon, during group drills, the dynamic between Sarah and the 5 men continued to strain. Every time she moved with precision, completed a task faster, or performed flawlessly under the instructor's gaze, the men grew more agitated. Their whispers became audible muttering, their smirks increasingly forced. Other recruits began to notice, exchanging looks of confusion and quiet admiration. Some began to question their peers' arrogance. Sarah's presence was quietly shifting the group's energy. Where once there had been mockery, now tension and doubt were forming. Even in moments of rest, Sarah's impact was evident. While other recruits sprawled on benches, exhausted and boasting about their minor achievements, she maintained perfect posture, reviewing notes, cleaning her gear, and preparing mentally for the next task. Mason glared at her silently, muttering, "She never stops." Torres added, "She's probably hiding something." Green scoffed, "Who knows what kind of background she has?" Holt and Kavanaugh remained silent, uneasily aware that their mocking was losing effectiveness. They couldn't break her, and that realization made them angrier, more desperate to assert dominance. As night fell, the recruits gathered in the mess hall. The 5 men lingered near her table, planning their ambush. Sarah sat quietly, unbothered, her eyes scanning the room, observing not just them, but everyone around her. She understood human behavior deeply, how fear, pride, and ignorance could cloud judgment. She watched the group slowly losing composure, their arrogance masking underlying insecurity. 40 seconds of confrontation would soon reveal what the men couldn't yet see, that she was a Navy SEAL, a warrior far beyond their comprehension. The whispers and plotting of Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh intensified. They compared their physical strength, boasting about past victories and imagining how easily they would humiliate Sarah. They didn't notice the subtle ways she positioned herself. Her calm breathing, her relaxed but ready posture, or the slight tightening of her fists. Every detail was recorded in her mind. Their arrogance blinded them, making them easy prey. She knew the moment of truth was coming, and when it arrived, the lesson would be unforgettable. By the end of the evening, Sarah's presence had shifted the energy of the entire barracks. The other recruits, initially skeptical of her abilities, were beginning to take notice of her skill, composure, and quiet authority. The 5 men, oblivious to the storm they were about to face, continued their plotting, unaware that their mockery had already set the stage for a lesson in respect, discipline, and humility that would last a lifetime. As lights out approached, the tension in the barracks was palpable. The 5 men were impatient, eager, unaware of the storm they were about to unleash on themselves. Sarah, calm as ever, lay down on her bunk, eyes open for a few moments, reflecting on the day. She had observed, she had assessed, and she had positioned herself. Tomorrow, everything would come to a head. She didn't need to rush. Their arrogance and ignorance had already sealed the outcome. And in that quiet moment before sleep, Sarah Hayes, unassuming, calm, disciplined, knew that the first major confrontation was imminent. The recruits had underestimated her. They had mocked her. But she was ready. The mess hall would become the proving ground, and 40 seconds would change everything. The next morning, the sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting long, pale streaks of light across the Naval Special Warfare Training Center at Coronado. Sarah Hayes moved through the camp with the same deliberate calm that had become her hallmark. Her boots clicked softly against the concrete, each step measured, silent and confident. She was aware of every movement around her, instructors pacing the compound, recruits jogging past, the occasional barking of a drill sergeant echoing across the tarmac. But her focus was on the 5 men who had spent the previous day plotting, whispering, and underestimating her abilities. Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh had decided that today would be the day they humiliated her. They lingered near the mess hall entrance, exchanging subtle smirks and whispered plans. "Tonight," Mason said under his breath, "we'll trap her. She's alone every night for the last tray cleanup. We'll corner her, teach her a lesson." Torres nodded, rubbing his hands together, excitement written across his face. Green laughed softly. "Yeah, it'll be hilarious. She won't see it coming." Holt and Kavanaugh offered subtle nods, their confidence bolstered by groupthink. None of them suspected that Sarah had already anticipated this. Sarah entered the mess hall quietly for breakfast, scanning the room with calm efficiency. A few recruits she recognized nodded politely, but the 5 men were already leaning against tables in the corner, trying to appear casual. Mason caught her gaze and smirked, signaling the others to prepare. They thought they were in control, unaware that Sarah's eyes had already tracked their positions, their stances, and their minor tells of impatience. To an outsider, it would have looked like normal vigilance, but for Sarah, it was a strategic assessment, the calm before a storm she intended to control. She ate quietly, chewing slowly, deliberately, as the 5 men whispered amongst themselves. "She's too quiet," Torres muttered. "I can't tell what she's thinking." Mason rolled his eyes. "Doesn't matter. Tonight she's going to regret showing up here." Green snickered, Holt grunted in agreement, and Kavanaugh simply stared, excitement and anticipation mingling in his eyes. Their arrogance made them blind to what they were about to face. After breakfast, training commenced, and the 5 men tried to mask their impatience by overperforming during drills. Mason pushed himself harder on the obstacle course, trying to finish first. Torres and Green exchanged nervous glances each time Sarah completed a task flawlessly, their attempts at competition failing miserably. Holt and Kavanaugh became increasingly tense, their movements sharper, their breathing heavier. They were impatient, eager to prove themselves dominant over the one they still considered weak. Sarah performed her drills with serene precision. She didn't boast, she didn't make noise, and she didn't challenge them. Yet every action she took highlighted the gap in skill between her and the 5 men. She climbed walls effortlessly, vaulted over obstacles with grace, and landed lightly on the ground without misstep. Her presence was magnetic, drawing the attention of other recruits, shifting whispers from doubt to awe. Even instructors noticed subtle differences in her technique, though they remained silent. She had the discipline of a seasoned operator and the patience of a predator waiting for the right moment. By late afternoon, the tension between Sarah and the 5 men had reached a peak. Mason leaned over to Torres while they rested, whispering, "Tonight's the night. Wait until the mess hall is empty. She'll never see it coming." Torres nodded, adjusting his gear. Green chuckled quietly. "We'll make her regret thinking she's one of us." Holt and Kavanaugh nodded, their eyes darting occasionally to Sarah, who remained oblivious, or so they thought. Evening descended, bringing with it the long shadows that stretched across the training center. The mess hall, usually bustling with noise and chatter, had become nearly empty. A few late stragglers moved about, finishing dinner or cleaning up after drills, but Sarah moved through the room alone. She carried her tray deliberately, placing it in front of her and sitting with perfect posture. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, noticing exits, positions of tables, and shadows, details that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. From the corner, Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh watched intently. "She's all alone," Mason whispered. "Perfect." Torres grinned, flexing his shoulders slightly. Green smirked. "No way she can handle all of us at once." Holt leaned forward, hands ready, Kavanaugh tensed. They approached silently, trying to hide their intentions under the guise of casual conversation. They were predators with prey, confident in their superiority. Sarah noticed their approach almost instantly. Her gaze flicked to each of them, calm and measured. She remained seated, eating slowly, as though nothing was happening. Her body language was relaxed, but her mind raced through scenarios. Every move, every footstep of the 5 men was catalogued. She knew exactly what they intended, and she was ready. She had anticipated their plan from the moment they began mocking her days earlier. Their arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. Mason reached Sarah's table first, leaning in slightly, his smirk smug. "Hey, think you're one of us, huh?" he said, his voice laced with mockery. Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh flanked him, forming a loose semicircle, effectively blocking the exits. The other recruits in the room noticed the tension, but didn't intervene. The scene looked like a typical confrontation, nothing more. But the atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation and unspoken threats. Sarah finished chewing her last bite, set down her tray carefully, and looked at each of them with an unblinking gaze. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Are we done?" The words were quiet, but carried authority. The 5 men froze, startled by the unexpected calm in her tone. They had expected fear, hesitation, maybe flinching. They had not expected control, precision, and confidence that radiated quietly yet undeniably. The room seemed to hold its breath. Chairs scraped the floor as Mason shifted his stance, and Green moved slightly closer, as if to intimidate her. Torres tightened his fists. Holt and Kavanaugh mirrored their companions, unaware that every subtle movement was being recorded and calculated. 40 seconds from now, they would discover the truth, a lesson in underestimation and respect that would be unforgettable. Sarah's mind raced calmly, preparing for action. She didn't need to hesitate. She had trained for this moment, not physically, but mentally. The ultimate test of patience, observation, and precision. At that moment, the tension in the mess hall was palpable. Every recruit who noticed the situation began to whisper quietly to each other. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though compressed by the unspoken intensity. The 5 men were confident, yet uncertainty began to creep into their expressions. They hadn't accounted for her calm. They hadn't considered the quiet danger of someone with decades of experience in lethal combat, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Sarah took a deep, silent breath, her eyes never leaving Mason's. The seconds stretched, each tick of the clock a pulse of anticipation. She knew the exact instant to move. Her body, honed through years of rigorous SEAL training, was ready. Every muscle, every reaction, every instinct awaited command. The 5 men were about to make their fatal mistake. In 40 seconds, the entire dynamic of the mess hall and the lesson about arrogance and respect would change forever. The mess hall was quiet, almost eerily so. The late evening light filtered the high windows, casting long, muted shadows across the polished floor. Sarah Hayes sat at her table, calm and composed, her tray pushed aside. Across from her, Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh loomed like predators circling prey. Their smirks had hardened into tense determination. They thought they were in control, ready to humiliate her. But Sarah didn't flinch. Her eyes flicked over each of them once, noting weight distribution, stance, reach, and momentum, all the tiny details that revealed exactly how their attack would unfold. Mason made the first move, a quick step forward intended to intimidate. "You really think you belong here?" He sneered. Green edged closer to block her escape, and Torres shifted to flank her from the other side. Holt and Kavanaugh followed, closing the semicircle. Every one of them underestimated her, blinded by arrogance and the group's false sense of superiority. They were confident, but they had never faced someone like Sarah Hayes, a decorated Navy SEAL trained in hand-to-hand combat, weapon control, and lethal efficiency. Time seemed to slow in that moment. 40 seconds. That was all it would take. Sarah's mind ran through every possibility, every counter, every sequence of movement. Her breathing remained calm, her posture relaxed but ready. Then Mason lunged forward, thinking a shove would break her. Sarah didn't flinch. She shifted her weight subtly, grabbed his arm in a fluid motion, and twisted it into a precise wrist lock. Mason went down, hitting the floor with a grunt of surprise and pain. The reaction was immediate. Torres moved in to strike from behind, but Sarah anticipated it before it even began. With a quick pivot and a calculated elbow to his midsection, she neutralized his approach, forcing him back several steps. Green attempted to grab her, swinging his fists wildly, but she sidestepped, using his momentum to guide him into a table with controlled force. Chairs clattered, metal trays rattled, and the room echoed with the sounds of controlled chaos. Holt and Kavanaugh, realizing their companions were being outmatched, tried to recover. Holt lunged, but Sarah caught him in a shoulder throw that sent him sprawling across the floor. Kavanaugh hesitated, frozen in shock, realizing that his confidence had been misplaced. Each second passed like a lifetime, but to Sarah, it was a carefully choreographed sequence: movement, precision, and restraint. She wasn't trying to hurt them unnecessarily. She was demonstrating what skill, control, and discipline looked like. In 40 seconds, the once confident group of 5 men was neutralized. Mason groaned, clutching his wrist. Torres leaned against a table, winded and dazed. Green sat on the floor, dazed and incredulous. Holt struggled to push himself upright, and Kavanaugh remained frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. The other recruits in the mess hall, previously hidden behind tables and chairs, watched in stunned silence. None had ever seen a display of skill and control like this. Sarah straightened, breathing steady, eyes calm and unreadable. She looked at the 5 men with a level gaze that carried authority without anger. "Are we done?" she asked quietly, her voice even but sharp. The words hit harder than any punch. The 5 men stared at her, realizing for the first time the gravity of their mistake. They had attempted to humiliate her, yet in under a minute they were defeated, not by brute strength, but by skill, strategy, and calm precision. The room was still for a moment, the tension so thick it could be felt. Then the door opened, and instructors entered, alerted by the commotion. "At ease," one of them commanded, surveying the scene. The 5 men tried to gather themselves, muttering excuses, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. But the instructors had seen everything, and the video footage from the security cameras told the same story. The lead instructor approached Sarah. "Lieutenant Hayes?" he said, voice sharp but controlled. The 5 men froze again. The word lieutenant struck them like lightning. They had just realized she wasn't a trainee. She was a Navy SEAL, a decorated operator. The reality crashed down on them. Their arrogance, their plotting, their mockery, it had all been directed at someone far beyond their comprehension. Sarah responded simply, "Yes, sir." There was no triumph in her tone, no boastful relief, just calm acknowledgement. The gravity of the situation settled in the room. The other recruits stared wide-eyed. Respect, which had been absent before, now filled the mess hall. The 5 men were humiliated, not by insults, but by the undeniable demonstration of skill and discipline they had failed to recognize. Mason muttered under his breath, "We? We didn't know." His voice trailed off, disbelief clear in every syllable. Torres shook his head, trying to comprehend the sequence of events. Green rubbed his face, the reality of their failure dawning. Holt slumped forward, silent. Kavanaugh simply stared, mouth slightly open, as if the words to explain their actions had abandoned him. The instructors moved among the men, giving instructions for disciplinary action. The 5 were immediately separated from the rest of the recruits, their arrogance replaced with humility and regret. Sarah, meanwhile, remained calm, unaffected by the attention she had drawn. She had not sought to embarrass them, only to teach a lesson in respect, control, and awareness, lessons that would resonate far longer than physical confrontation ever could. After the mess hall had cleared, the other recruits lingered, whispering in awe about what they had just witnessed. "Did you see that?" one asked. She took them all down. In seconds, another shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it. That's not just skill. That's precision, control, everything." Sarah had shifted the dynamic of the training class in a single moment. Her quiet presence now commanded genuine respect from everyone, including those who had doubted her at the start. Sarah finally walked out of the mess hall, calm and composed, leaving the 5 humbled men behind. The sound of her boots on the floor echoed in the empty room, a quiet reminder of authority and competence. She hadn't celebrated, she hadn't gloated, she hadn't needed to. Her actions had spoken louder than words ever could. In 40 seconds, she had transformed arrogance into humility, ignorance into awareness, and mockery into respect. That night, the story of the 40-second confrontation began to spread quietly through the base. Recruits who had witnessed it firsthand shared the tale with others, who in turn passed it on to new arrivals. Sarah Hayes, the quiet, unassuming woman who had joined the barracks days earlier, had now become a legend, not because she sought fame, but because she had exemplified the highest standard of skill, discipline, and calm authority. And somewhere deep inside, the 5 men who had underestimated her were left with an unforgettable truth: arrogance, when faced with skill and control, is nothing but a lesson waiting to be learned, often in the most humbling, immediate, and unforgettable way. The mess hall was silent. The clang of fallen trays and scattered chairs had finally faded into a tense, heavy quiet. Recruits who had witnessed the showdown exchanged wide-eyed glances, some whispering, some simply staring, frozen by what they had just seen. The 5 men, Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh, lay scattered across the floor, breathing heavily, faces pale with shock. None of them had anticipated the sheer skill, precision, and calm force with which Sarah Hayes had neutralized them in under 40 seconds. Just as the 5 began to comprehend their defeat, the lead instructor entered. His boots echoed against the linoleum floor, a rhythm that carried authority. "At ease, Lieutenant Hayes," he said sharply. The words hit the 5 men like a physical blow. Their heads snapped toward Sarah. "Lieutenant?" Mason's eyes widened. His mouth opened and closed, as though the word had no meaning. Torres stumbled backward slightly. Green dropped his hand from his head. Holt froze mid-breath, and Kavanaugh's expression went blank. The truth settled over them like a thundercloud. She was not a trainee. Sarah rose slowly from her seat, posture perfect, every movement deliberate. She straightened her shoulders, tucked in her uniform, and addressed the instructor crisply. "Yes, sir." Her voice carried authority, calm, unwavering, the tone of someone used to command, used to life or death decisions, used to being trusted in impossible situations. The room seemed to shrink around the 5 men as reality set in. They had spent days mocking her, plotting against her, believing themselves superior. And now they understood the depth of their miscalculation. The lead instructor walked slowly past the fallen recruits, his eyes scanning each one. He had observed the chaos, the precise control Sarah had displayed, and he was not surprised by the outcome. "You 5, he said, voice firm, "have just attempted to humiliate a superior officer. Not only that, you underestimated a Navy SEAL, one of the most highly trained operators in the world." He stopped in front of Mason, whose knees were still trembling. "Do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" Mason nodded mutely, his ego shattered. Whispers spread like wildfire through the other recruits. "She's a SEAL?" one asked, voice barely audible. "I thought she was just another trainee," said another. Sarah's reputation transformed in a single moment. The quiet, disciplined, unassuming woman who had walked among them unnoticed was now recognized as elite, formidable, and beyond comparison. Where skepticism and doubt had existed, awe and respect took root instantly. The 5 men tried to speak, but their words faltered. Mason muttered, We didn't know." Torres attempted to justify. "We thought she was." Green cut him off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter." "We were wrong." Holt and Kavanaugh remained silent, faces pale, eyes lowered. Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her calm authority said more than any words could. Their humiliation was not inflicted through anger or malice, but through the undeniable demonstration of skill, control, and experience. The lead instructor continued, addressing the class. This is the lesson you all need to understand. Respect is earned through ability and integrity, not by arrogance or physical intimidation. Lieutenant Hayes has demonstrated exactly what discipline, calm, and training look like under pressure. The words resonated throughout the room. For the recruits who had watched silently from the corners, it was a revelation. They had underestimated her, just as the 5 had. And now, they understood the consequences of that mistake. As the instructor spoke, Sarah moved to collect her tray quietly. Her movements were precise, controlled, deliberate. The 5 men on the floor watched her, faces flushed with shame, hearts pounding with the sudden awareness of their own misjudgment. Every step she took was a reminder of the gap between them and her. A gap not measured in physical strength alone, but in discipline, focus, and years of experience that could not be matched by arrogance. When the instructors had finished assessing the scene, the 5 men were taken aside. They were not only reprimanded, but required to reflect on their behavior under observation. The lead instructor made it clear their actions could have ended catastrophically. Had Lieutenant Hayes chosen to respond differently, he said, voice low but firm, "This could have been far worse for you. This is a lesson you will carry for the rest of your careers. Do not forget it." As the 5 men were led away, Sarah remained in the mess hall. Other recruits approached, cautiously at first, and with growing respect. "Lieutenant Hayes," one said quietly, I didn't know. I underestimated you." She nodded, acknowledging their words with quiet grace. "It's not about underestimation," she replied softly. "It's about understanding skill, respect, and readiness. Arrogance is dangerous, in training or in the field." Her calm tone reinforced the lesson she had just demonstrated. The whispers continued, spreading through the barracks and beyond. By the end of the evening, word of what had happened had reached every corner of the training center. Recruits who had doubted her skill were now sharing the story with new arrivals, emphasizing her discipline, precision, and authority. Sarah's quiet demeanor had become legendary, and her actions in the mess hall served as a defining moment, not only for the 5 men who had challenged her, but for every recruit who had witnessed it or heard about it afterward. Meanwhile, the 5 men struggled to process their own failure. Mason replayed the 40 seconds in his mind, the fluidity of her movements, the control she had maintained while neutralizing each of them. Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh felt the same shock, disbelief, and the creeping realization that they had underestimated someone whose ability they could never match without humility, discipline, and years of dedicated training. Their arrogance had been shattered, replaced with a sense of awe and respect they could not yet articulate. In the days following the incident, Sarah returned to her routine with the same calm, disciplined efficiency. She didn't linger on the events, didn't gloat, didn't highlight her skills unnecessarily. She trained, observed, and guided when needed. But the atmosphere in the barracks had shifted. Where arrogance had once ruled, there was now caution, respect, and heightened awareness. Every recruit understood that skill could not be judged by appearance, and that underestimation could have immediate and humbling consequences. Sarah knew the true value of what had happened. She had not only demonstrated her abilities, but had also delivered an unforgettable lesson in humility and respect. The 5 men would never forget it. The other recruits would carry the story forward. The culture of the training center, at least in that cohort, had subtly but irreversibly changed. Competence, discipline, and calm authority had won the day, leaving arrogance in its wake. By nightfall, the mess hall was empty again, bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. Sarah walked out alone, boots clicking softly against the floor. Her posture remained perfect, her eyes calm and observing, her presence commanding without demand. The 5 men, now confined to quarters for reflection, could only replay the lesson they had learned in 40 unforgettable seconds. The story of the Navy SEAL who humbled them would echo throughout the barracks for months to come, serving as both a warning and inspiration. Sarah paused at the doorway, taking one last look at the room. The tables were scattered, the floor still marked with the chaos of the evening, and the air carried a tension that would not easily fade. She smiled faintly to herself. The lesson had been delivered. Respect had been earned. And for the first time, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not arrogance. Just the serene acknowledgement that skill, control, and discipline had once again proven their worth, and that arrogance, no matter how loud, could never survive in the presence of true mastery. As she stepped into the night air, the cool breeze carried the faint scent of the ocean across the training center. The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore in the distance, a natural metronome echoing the lesson she had imparted. In life, in combat, in training, underestimation is dangerous, arrogance is costly, and mastery commands respect without demand. For Sarah Hayes, the 40 seconds in the mess hall would be remembered not as a moment of conflict, but as a demonstration of everything she represented: precision, discipline, and the quiet, unstoppable force of a Navy SEAL. The day after the mess hall incident, the atmosphere at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center was palpably different. Whispers followed Sarah Hayes wherever she went, a subtle hum of respect mixed with awe. Recruits glanced at her with cautious admiration, their earlier skepticism replaced with the understanding that she was far more than the quiet, unassuming figure they had first encountered. The 5 men who had tried to humiliate her were now painfully aware of the consequences of arrogance, and the entire cohort had witnessed a lesson that no textbook could convey. Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh were summoned to meet with the lead instructor before morning drills. They entered the office quietly, their heads lowered, their confidence shattered. Each felt the weight of embarrassment, but also a gnawing sense of fear and respect, not for punishment, but for what they had faced in the mess hall. The instructor's gaze swept over them, calm but intense. "You have been reckless," he said. "Your actions could have had severe consequences, not just for yourselves, but for the integrity of this training program. Lieutenant Hayes has demonstrated professionalism, skill, and restraint, qualities you will now be required to emulate." Mason swallowed hard. "Sir, we understand," he muttered. Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh echoed the sentiment, their voices subdued. The instructor leaned forward, his tone deliberate. "Let this be a lesson. Arrogance and disrespect have no place here. You were fortunate that Lieutenant Hayes chose to demonstrate control rather than retribution. Consider this a rare opportunity, a lesson you will carry for life." Outside the office, the other recruits were already discussing the incident. Some whispered excitedly, others shook their heads in disbelief. Sarah's actions had become the defining story of the week, a benchmark for skill and discipline. Her performance had not only neutralized the 5 men, but had also reshaped the mindset of the entire cohort. Where once arrogance had flourished, humility and cautious respect now prevailed. Recruits began to evaluate themselves more critically, realizing that appearance and bravado meant little compared to skill, control, and experience. Back in the barracks, the 5 men were left to reflect. Mason sat on his bunk, replaying the 40 seconds over and over in his mind. He couldn't get past the precision, the calm, the absolute control Sarah had displayed. Torres paced slowly, frustration mingling with awe, while Green buried his face in his hands, struggling to reconcile his arrogance with the truth of what he had witnessed. Holt and Kavanaugh remained silent, the lesson settling deep into their consciousness. For the first time, they understood that respect must be earned, and that underestimation is a dangerous gamble. During training drills that morning, Sarah moved through the exercises as always, calm, precise, and focused. The instructors observed her closely, noting her influence on the other recruits. Even those who had never directly witnessed the mess hall incident adjusted their behavior subtly in response to her presence. Work that had previously been sloppy or rushed became disciplined and deliberate. Her silent example set a new standard, demonstrating that true skill is recognized not only in performance, but in composure under pressure. The 5 men were closely monitored in the days that followed. Instructors assigned them additional drills, focusing on teamwork, control, and respect. Mason struggled initially, still recovering from the psychological shock of his defeat. Torres's confidence wavered, and Green's competitiveness became tempered by humility. Holt and Kavanaugh, while quieter, showed signs of internal reflection. The corrective measures were rigorous but necessary. The instructors wanted them to internalize the lesson fully, ensuring that the arrogance that had nearly led to catastrophe would never resurface. Word of Sarah's performance reached even the most skeptical recruits. Some who had once dismissed her quietly began to observe her more closely, studying her technique, her precision, and her discipline. They realized that her authority was not derived from intimidation or aggression, but from experience, skill, and a calm, unwavering presence. The impact on the unit was immediate. Respect replaced skepticism. Careful observation replaced reckless bravado, and quiet discipline became the standard for behavior. During downtime, Sarah continued her routine, quietly organizing gear, reviewing tactical notes, and maintaining her composure. She never flaunted her victory or sought acknowledgement. Yet her influence was unmistakable. Recruits who had witnessed the confrontation now approached her with questions about technique, strategy, and mindset. Sarah answered calmly, offering guidance without condescension. Her lessons extended beyond combat skills. They encompassed leadership, emotional control, and the importance of humility in high-stakes environments. The 5 men, though initially resentful, began to internalize these lessons. Mason, once brash and dismissive, started to lead by example during team exercises, emphasizing coordination over individual dominance. Torres, still slightly stubborn, learned to temper his impulsiveness with careful calculation. Green developed a newfound awareness of his limits. Holt cultivated patience and discipline, and Kavanaugh learned to think before acting. Their transformation was slow, sometimes uncomfortable, but profound. The incident had left a permanent mark on their development as future operators. Meanwhile, the mess hall itself became a quiet symbol of respect and caution. Recruits who previously took pride in teasing or testing their peers now approached interactions with awareness. They recognized that skill could not be measured by size, loudness, or bravado. The 40 seconds in the mess hall had taught a broader lesson, that judgment must be based on observation, that arrogance invites consequences, and that discipline is the true measure of strength. Weeks passed, and Sarah's influence continued to ripple through the training center. Recruits adjusted their approach to drills, teamwork improved, and the culture of the unit shifted subtly but undeniably. Arrogance became rare, respect became the baseline expectation, and every new arrival heard stories of the Navy SEAL who had neutralized 5 men in 40 seconds without aggression, anger, or spectacle. Her presence served as a living standard for what could be achieved through skill, focus, and calm authority. By the end of the month, the 5 men had transformed significantly. Their interactions with Sarah had evolved from fear and resentment to cautious respect and eventually sincere admiration. They had learned that leadership is not about intimidation or physical dominance, but about skill, patience, and the ability to command respect through action. Each one of them carried the memory of that 40-second confrontation as a constant reminder of the lessons they had learned. Sarah herself never boasted about the incident. To her, the 40 seconds had been a demonstration of fundamental principles: observation, preparation, precision, and restraint. She continued her training, guiding when necessary, observing when required, and maintaining the quiet authority that had defined her presence from the start. Yet her impact was undeniable. She had reshaped the dynamics of the cohort, instilled humility where arrogance had flourished, and reinforced the importance of discipline, skill, and respect in every aspect of training. As the sun set over the training center, casting golden light across the compound, Sarah moved through the barracks one final time for the evening inspection. The 5 men, now disciplined and attentive, followed instructions without hesitation. Other recruits watched her with a mix of reverence and quiet determination, eager to emulate the qualities she exemplified. The lesson of the 40 seconds had been internalized, not through punishment or anger, but through calm, undeniable demonstration of skill and authority. By the time night fell, the story of Sarah Hayes' 40-second triumph had spread through the entire cohort. Recruits who had initially doubted her now treated her with respect, observing her as a benchmark for performance, discipline, and composure. The 5 men who had plotted against her now walked with humility, aware of the consequences of arrogance, and determined to earn the respect they had once taken for granted. In the quiet of the night, as Sarah lay in her bunk, she reflected on the events of the past days. The confrontation, the revelation, and the consequences had served their purpose. The 5 men had been taught a lesson they would never forget. The other recruits had gained a newfound respect for skill and discipline, and the culture of the unit had shifted subtly but permanently. It was not about pride, victory, or humiliation. It was about teaching, guiding, and reinforcing the principles that define a Navy SEAL. The consequences of those 40 seconds in the mess hall would continue to resonate throughout the training center for months, shaping the behavior of recruits, instructors, and future cohorts. Sarah Hayes had not only demonstrated the power of skill and discipline, but had also created a legacy, one of respect, humility, and the understanding that true strength is measured not by arrogance or bravado, but by control, precision, and quiet authority. Days turned into weeks at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, but the memory of the mess hall incident lingered like a shadow over Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Cavanaugh. Their humiliation had been swift and undeniable, but its impact had proven far deeper than mere embarrassment. Each man was forced to confront the arrogance and impulsiveness that had led them to believe they could overpower Sarah Hayes, a Navy SEAL far beyond their experience or skill. For them, the 40 seconds had become a turning point, a defining moment that would guide the rest of their training. The 5 men approached the next morning with a new mindset. The first time they had entered the obstacle course after the incident, Mason hesitated, thinking back to the calm precision with which Sarah had neutralized them. He had previously relied on brute strength and overconfidence to navigate obstacles, but now he focused on strategy, timing, and technique. He slowed his pace intentionally, analyzed each challenge, and pushed himself beyond his comfort zone. Torres, Green, Holt, and Cavanaugh followed suit. They began asking questions, seeking guidance, and observing Sarah during exercises, trying to learn not just how she moved, but why. Sarah noticed the shift immediately. She had not sought to humiliate or punish them. Her role was to guide, demonstrate, and set the standard. When Mason stumbled while climbing the rope course, she offered a simple piece of advice. Keep your core tight and your movements deliberate. Don't rush what you cannot control. Her voice was calm, almost neutral, but the lesson resonated. Mason adjusted his technique, climbing more efficiently and landing with control at the top. Torres and Green watched, impressed by the clarity of instruction, while Holt and Cavanaugh began applying the advice to their own movements. The process of redemption was gradual. The 5 men had to rebuild confidence, not through arrogance, but through disciplined practice and careful observation. Mason spent hours practicing hand-to-hand techniques, refining his strikes and grappling skills under Sarah's watchful eye. Torres worked on accuracy with firearms, mimicking her calm, deliberate breathing and methodical approach. Green studied tactical scenarios, analyzing each step with careful thought rather than impulsive action. Holt and Kavanaugh focused on teamwork, learning to anticipate others' moves and coordinate effectively. Sarah observed silently, correcting mistakes with gentle authority, never belittling but always challenging. Outside of physical training, the 5 men also had to confront their attitudes. They held group discussions under the supervision of instructors, reflecting on their actions in the mess hall. Mason admitted his arrogance and impatience, acknowledging that his desire to dominate had blinded him to reality. Torres confessed that he had underestimated skill in favor of strength, and Green admitted that his competitiveness had been uncontrolled. Holt and Kavanaugh offered their own reflections, revealing a mix of fear, guilt, and recognition of the lesson Sarah had delivered. The process was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. They had to earn their redemption, not expect it. Sarah's influence extended beyond direct instruction. Her quiet presence in the training center served as a constant reminder of the standards the 5 men now aspired to meet. She moved with purpose and calm authority, demonstrating discipline in every action. From maintaining gear to reviewing tactical strategies to performing drills flawlessly. The other recruits, inspired by her example, also adjusted their behavior, creating an environment where respect, observation, and careful practice became the norm. Weeks passed, and the changes in the 5 men became noticeable. Mason's movements were more precise, his decisions more calculated. Torres's aim improved dramatically, and his impulsiveness diminished. Green approached tactical challenges with patience and foresight. Holt became a reliable team player, anticipating his teammates' moves and supporting them effectively. Kavanaugh developed a quiet confidence, no longer seeking to dominate, but to contribute meaningfully. Their transformation was subtle yet profound, driven by the lessons Sarah had imparted both in action and in example. The 5 men also began to see the broader impact of their transformation. Other recruits started looking to them for guidance, noticing their improvement and the humility with which they approached training. Where once they had been objects of ridicule, they now became examples of what can be achieved when arrogance is replaced with discipline and observation. Sarah's influence had not only shaped them individually, but had reshaped the dynamics of the entire cohort. Respect was now earned through skill and composure, not aggression or dominance. One afternoon, during a high-intensity exercise designed to simulate real combat scenarios, the 5 men were paired with other recruits to navigate a complex tactical challenge. Mason coordinated the group with efficiency, integrating Torres's improved marksmanship, Green's strategic thinking, Holt's teamwork, and Kavanaugh's steady presence. The team moved fluidly, anticipating obstacles and communicating silently. Observers noted the transformation. The 5 men who had once been reckless and arrogant were now calm, competent, and respected by everyone around them. Sarah watched from a distance, quietly analyzing their performance. She did not interfere, letting them navigate challenges on their own while remaining available for guidance if necessary. When the exercise concluded, she approached, her gaze calm but authoritative. "Well executed," she said simply. "You've applied discipline, observation, and teamwork. Continue to build on this foundation. Remember, skill is meaningless without control and respect." Her words, though few, carried the weight of experience, reinforcing the lessons she had delivered in the mess hall weeks earlier. By the end of the training cycle, the 5 men had fully internalized the lessons of that 40-second confrontation. Mason, once brash and arrogant, now led by example, embodying the principles Sarah had demonstrated. Torres had replaced impulsive behavior with calculated action. Green had developed strategic patience. Holt had become a collaborative leader. and Kavanaugh had transformed into a disciplined, reliable operator. Their redemption was complete, not through punishment or coercion, but through guided reflection, skill development, and the subtle power of Sarah's example. The impact of their transformation rippled through the training center. Other recruits observed and emulated their disciplined approach, creating a culture of careful observation, respect, and dedication. The story of the 40 seconds in the mess hall, once a moment of humiliation, had become a cornerstone of training philosophy, a vivid example of the consequences of underestimating skill and the value of humility, observation, and calm authority. Sarah's role in this transformation remained understated but undeniable. She did not seek recognition or accolades. Her focus was on teaching through example, demonstrating the principles that define a Navy SEAL: discipline, composure, skill, and the ability to inspire change without force or ego. Her quiet authority had reshaped not only the 5 men who had once challenged her, but also the broader cohort, leaving a lasting legacy of respect, humility, and excellence. By the time the training cycle concluded, Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh had earned the respect of both their peers and instructors. The 5 men, once marked by arrogance and impulsiveness, had been reborn as disciplined, competent, and respected members of the team. The memory of those 40 seconds in the mess hall remained vivid, a permanent reminder of the lessons learned and the power of skill, calm, and quiet authority. As Sarah Hayes walked through the training center one final time before the end-of-cycle exercises, she observed the cohort, the recruits performing drills with precision, the 5 men demonstrating competence and humility, and the culture of respect that now prevailed. She smiled faintly to herself, not from pride, but from the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her presence, her discipline, and her example had made a lasting impact. The 40 seconds in the mess hall had become a lesson in redemption, and that lesson would resonate for years to come. Months had passed since the mess hall incident at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, yet the story of the 40 seconds continued to echo through the barracks, classrooms, and obstacle courses. New recruits arriving for their initial orientation were quickly introduced to the tale, a story not of humiliation, but of precision, discipline, and the subtle power of skill tempered with calm authority. Sarah Hayes, once a quiet, unassuming presence, had become a benchmark for excellence, her actions serving as a living lesson that would be remembered long after she left the base. The 5 men who had once sought to humiliate her, Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh, had transformed completely. No longer brash or reckless, they had become disciplined operators, guiding newer recruits through training exercises with patience and strategic foresight. Mason led by example, ensuring that every move he made was precise and deliberate. Torres applied his sharpshooting skills with the composure Sarah had taught him, while Green approached every tactical scenario with measured planning. Holt excelled in teamwork, anticipating and supporting his peers, and Kavanaugh moved with quiet confidence, no longer seeking to dominate, but to contribute meaningfully to the unit. The ripple effects of their transformation extended beyond individual performance. Instructors observed a noticeable shift in the culture of the training center. Where arrogance had once been tolerated, there was now an unspoken code of respect and observation. Recruits approached challenges with caution, studied their peers and superiors carefully, and understood that competence, not bravado, dictated outcomes. The 40 seconds in the mess hall had become more than a story. It had become a philosophy, a guiding principle for every recruit who entered the base. Sarah herself continued her routine with quiet consistency. She moved through drills, briefings, and tactical exercises with the same calm authority, never seeking acknowledgement or praise. Her influence was subtle but unmistakable. Recruits observed her methodical approach to problem solving, Her careful assessment of each situation, and her unwavering focus. Her presence reminded everyone that mastery is not about aggression or loud displays, but about preparation, precision, and disciplined execution. Occasionally, Sarah would offer guidance, answering questions about technique, strategy, or mindset. Her responses were measured, never condescending, and always insightful. Skill alone is not enough, she would say. Discipline, patience, and respect are what transform ability into effectiveness. Underestimation can cost you more than embarrassment. It can cost lives. Her words resonated deeply, particularly for those who had witnessed her mastery firsthand. The legacy of the 40 seconds was particularly evident during high-pressure exercises. Recruits who had previously rushed through tasks now paused to assess, calculated their movements, and worked together with a newfound awareness. The 5 men who had confronted Sarah were often placed in leadership roles during these exercises. Their previous failure had forged humility and strategic thinking, qualities that now made them natural guides for their peers. They were living proof that mistakes, when learned from, could create stronger, more capable operators. One afternoon, a new recruit, unaware of the story, attempted to challenge Sarah during a tactical exercise, believing he could outmaneuver her. He was quickly corrected, not through physical force, but through calm demonstration. Sarah allowed him to make small errors, guiding his movements subtly, correcting his approach, and showing him the consequences of poor decision-making. By the end of the exercise, the recruit had learned more in those minutes than he could have from lectures or written manuals. Observers whispered to each other, recalling the legend of the 40 seconds, the demonstration that skill, patience, and calm authority always prevail. The story of the mess hall also began to influence the 5 men personally. Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh often reflected on those 40 seconds, sharing their experiences with other recruits, not to boast, but to emphasize the lessons of humility and respect. "You think you're in control," Mason would explain quietly during briefings, "until you face someone who's prepared, disciplined, and calm. Skill is nothing without control." Torres would add, "We learned that arrogance is dangerous. Underestimating anyone, no matter how unassuming, can cost you everything." Their reflections became part of the informal curriculum, reinforcing Sarah's influence long after she had delivered the lesson in the mess hall. Months later, during a graduation ceremony, the impact of Sarah's presence was evident. Recruits moved with precision, demonstrating discipline and confidence that had been shaped by the example she had set. The 5 men stood proudly with their peers, acknowledging the journey they had undergone, from arrogance and impulsiveness to humility and competence. Instructors commented on the transformation, noting that the cohort had been fundamentally changed by a single event, a 40-second confrontation that became a catalyst for learning, reflection, and growth. Even after Sarah Hayes left the training center for operational deployment, her influence persisted. New recruits who had never met her still learned of her 40 seconds of controlled mastery. They studied her techniques, applied the principles she had demonstrated, and sought to emulate the discipline and calm she embodied. The legacy she left was not in fame or accolades, but in the culture of respect, precision, and unwavering discipline that she had instilled. For the 5 men, the lessons endured beyond training. Mason, Torres, Green, Holt, and Kavanaugh carried the memory of those 40 seconds into every subsequent mission, every tactical exercise, and every interaction with peers. They understood that true skill was measured not only by ability, but by composure under pressure, respect for others, and humility in the face of challenge. The incident had become a touchstone, a moment they would reference whenever arrogance threatened to re-emerge. Years later, when recounting their training experiences to new recruits or peers in operational units, the 5 men would invariably speak of Sarah Hayes and the mess hall confrontation. They emphasized that it was not about humiliation, but about learning, growth, and the transformative power of skill and discipline. The story of the 40 seconds became a symbol, a parable of mastery, and a reminder that respect must be earned, not demanded, and that underestimation can have profound consequences. Sarah's legacy also extended to the broader naval special warfare community. Instructors incorporated this story into their lessons, not as gossip or legend, but as an illustration of essential principles: observation, patience, precision, discipline, and respect. The 40 seconds became more than a moment in time. It became a teaching tool, a reference point, and a symbol of the values that define elite operators. As she moved forward in her career, Sarah Hayes continued to embody the principles she had demonstrated. Her actions, both in the mess hall and in countless other operational contexts, reinforced the lessons she had imparted without fanfare: that true mastery requires control, that arrogance is a liability, and that respect and humility are the foundation of effective leadership. The recruits who had witnessed her, and the 5 men who had sought redemption, carried her example into every challenge, every operation, and every interaction, ensuring that her influence would persist long beyond her presence at Coronado. In the quiet moments, when recruits reflected on their training, they remembered the 40 seconds in the mess hall, a brief, intense episode that had altered the trajectory of their careers, reshaped their attitudes, and demonstrated the enduring power of skill, discipline, and calm authority. It was a lesson in humility, a story of redemption, and a living example of what it means to be a Navy SEAL: controlled, precise, and always prepared to lead by example, not by intimidation. The legacy of Sarah Hayes endured, not in stories of violence or triumph, but in the respect, discipline, and excellence she inspired. The cohort she influenced would carry those lessons forward, passing them on to every new recruit who arrived, ensuring that the principles she embodied, skill, patience, humility, and unwavering discipline, would continue to shape the future of the naval special warfare community for years to come. And so, the story of the 40 seconds in the mess hall became legend, not for the confrontation itself, but for the lasting lessons it imparted, the transformations it inspired, and the enduring reminder that true mastery commands respect, shapes culture, and leaves a legacy that echoes long after the moment is past.